time to look back at match day 2 of the Bundesliga, which has proved to be quite eventful. So obviously the first place to start will be with the Friday game, as that was the biggest game in terms of what was going on, as in the teams, because obviously this was Hamburg's home return to the Bundesliga now. The Volksparkstadion was going to have Bundesliga football for the first time in 7 years, and it was against their city rivals. So the perfect place for you to get your first win of the season. But this ended up proving to be a bit of a reality check for Hamburg, because St. Pauli were very impressive throughout. I mean, you could tell the difference that one had been in the Bundesliga for a year and the other one was newly promoted. And it was night and day in Hamburg, apart from like a good spell in the first 10-15 minutes. It never really had like a big hold of the game. There were several standout players for St. Pauli. Andreas Hatunji, who's their new signing, he's on loan from Burnley. He was quite impressive. He's now scored 2 goals in 2 games. What was interesting about him is the fact that he went toe-to-toe in a nice battle with Jordan Tonariga and won. And there was even a point in the game where St. Pauli actually had scored from Hatunji's winning of the battle against the Hamburg defender, but it was ruled out for a foul, but it wasn't a foul, and so Hamburg could have really been, or St. Pauli could have really been 2-0 up. Hatunji really looks like the type of striker that St. Pauli has been missing, because obviously they have lost Johannes Eggestein and Joshua Gidevogi in the summer, but Hatunji is an interesting player because he's becoming quite a common theme in the Bundesliga now, is he's very tall and he has like these deceiving qualities, such as he's very quick and was actually the fastest player on their St. Pauli side on Friday night as well. The other standout player for St. Pauli was Joel Fajita, a midfielder that signed from Sint-Truiden in Belgium in the summer as well. He was great on both ends, defensively and attacking wise. He's very much the box-to-box, while his midfield partner James Sands is more of the defensive-minded midfielder. And Fajita showed his skill set when he provided the assist for Hatunji's goal, where it was just a splitting pass through the Hamburg defence, which allowed Hatunji to round Daniel Hoyer Fernandez. So for Hamburg, this is a real reality check now. They had a strong performance in their opening game against Gladbach, but now in hindsight, it's not really that impressive, especially considering how Gladbach have played. But obviously, now that they've had this reality check, they can use the international break to build on what they've learned in the opening 2 games and attack the Bundesliga again when they return. However, the game after the international break is against Bayern Munich, which isn't exactly an easy game to play. The next game has become retrospectively a bit of a major talking point. It's Bayer Leverkusen versus Werder Bremen. It ended up finishing 3-3. Leverkusen were 3-1 up at one point of this game, and considering how Bremen had been playing, you would have expected them to see out the lead. But Bremen managed to fight back and ended up rescuing a point which did kind of silence some of the Horst Steffen doubters, including myself. It was another poor performance from Bayer Leverkusen. They lacked intensity, they lacked individualistic from most of the players. And obviously you saw this from comments from Robert Andrich after the game. Then rumours started to circle that maybe Ten Hag could be sacked because he seemed to have lost the dressing room in the space of 3 professional games. And there were talks about the players not being happy. There were talks that he's not even in good term, or he hasn't worked in agreement with his coaching staff. And it was just kind of all building up. And then today, it was announced that Ten Hag was sacked. And obviously it's a case of, okay, this is clearly rotting. Do you want to stop the rot now, or potentially rot further and the situation get worse? Or do you stop it now and then start afresh already? Which from that point of view makes sense. But from the fact that you have basically then just wasted 3 months for no reason at all, doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense of the fact that it's been 2 games, and like really, should you have maybe given him some more time, especially considering the fact it's been a constant revolving door of transfer after transfer of players coming in and out, and him never having a real settled squad? You can make the argument that makes it slightly unfair for him because of this. And now it begs the question of where do Leverkusen go from here? Who do they replace Ten Hag with? Because from their point of view, this is also quite embarrassing. They had all this time to try and find a replacement for Xabi Alonso, and they clearly didn't do enough background checks, ended up with Ten Hag, who they've ultimately sacked already. So the whole thing really is a bit of a joke. And now it begs the question of who does replace Ten Hag? Because obviously the ideal scenario is now you'll find a head coach who can come in during this international break and with the players that are there, try and instill your ideas. Obviously there's not really a lot of good coaches that are available right now, and the trend of Bundesliga managers or the Bundesliga clubs are usually to go with German-speaking managers, which kind of significantly reduces the criteria that you're asking for, because now you're looking at Marco Rose, Danny Rühl, who used to manage Sheffield Wednesday, Lucien Favre, Edin Terzic. Like, it's not a list that inspires you to think, oh yeah, we can achieve something with this. So it's whether Leverkusen see this and think, okay, we hire a short-term option until the end of the season, even though the season's just begun, and then we potentially try and sign a good head coach, such as Cesc Fabregas, for example. An option I would like to see in the Bundesliga is Ange Postecoglou. Obviously, his style of football will probably be very fitting for the Bundesliga. But this is the story now that will take up most of the space during the international break, which does tend to prove to be quite boring. While Leverkusen, Dortmund and Leipzig are already quite a way off Bayern, the one team that is neck and neck with them at the moment is Eintracht Frankfurt. They put in another strong performance against Hoffenheim and beat them 3-1. This was a game where Ritsu Doan stepped up after last week where he was a bit quiet, but his first goal was great. It was kind of Robin-esque. And he also then assisted Can Özil's goal. And I think it's quite safe to say that this is Can Özil's breakout season. It's not surprising that it's happened now when he's finally being able to play in a position that he's comfortable in, because obviously usually he would have had to be shoehorned in to fit around Omar Mamouche and Hugo Ekitike, but now he can play in his comfortable position behind the striker and it's clearly paying off. I mean, also the same could be said to Jean Behoyer. I mean, he was also shoehorned into a position last season. It didn't really work. But now he's already stepping up again. And as I mentioned last week as well, I do think the duo of Hugo Larsson and Faris Chaibi in the midfield is also quite an interesting one, especially because Chaibi, it seemed like he was heading the way out of Frankfurt, but he somehow found a new lease of life in this position and has been rewarded for it. And I think that's quite interesting. So if I was a betting man, I would just invest all my stocks in Frankfurt at the moment. I think they give vibes of the Bundesliga teams in the past who have been young and have ended up fighting for the title, whether that's Dortmund under Jurgen Klopp or Stuttgart in 2007 with Mario Gomez and Sami Khedira. It gives off that type of vibe here. Whether they can emulate the success of those teams is obviously yet to be seen. And also we'll be waiting for their first major challenge, which could potentially come after the international break. So it will be interesting to see how Frankfurt develop. The next game is Stuttgart versus Borussia Mönchengladbach. Quite a boring game in the grand scheme of things, but Stuttgart managed to find a way to win as they beat Gladbach 1-0. It was obviously not the most impressive performance for them, but obviously who cares? They still won. What was quite obvious though is they did lack a real threat of creativity. It doesn't help that they've lost Nick Woltemade now, who's joined Newcastle. They've lost Enzo Mio, who's moved to Saudi Arabia. And Dennis Undav went off, injured during this game. But it seems to be an area that they probably will address in the transfer window. I'm filming this on deadline day, so they probably have already one rumoured option. And likely option is Bilal El Khanouzi from Leicester, who was previously at Genk, and they seem to be investing quite a lot after the Woltemade check hit. So it will be interesting to see what Stuttgart could do, because what they have struggled with is being wasteful. You saw it against Union in front of goal. Then they were wasteful in possession against Bayern, and now they finally kick-started their season, which they've needed to do. And now they can build on this, and with the incoming of a creative threat, that will help them massively. And then with this now, especially the injury to Undav and the absence of Voltemade, this should be the time that Ermedin Demirovic does step forward now, because he is still a goal threat, which he showed against Eintracht Braunschweig last week in the Pokal. For Gladbach, they're also in a similar situation. They're not creative at all, and they lack a real goal threat in the absence of Tim Kleindienst. It's something ridiculous, like they haven't scored a Bundesliga goal in over 300 minutes, which equates to 4 Bundesliga games. The last time they did score a goal was in a 4-4 draw with Hoffenheim, which was at the beginning of May. And so the absence of Tim Kleindienst is quite obviously felt. But as I said previously, it can't go on like this, because they do have the Giovanni Reina isn't going to make this team any more better from a creative aspect. And then you have Robin Hack, who isn't exactly the most creative player. Shooter Machino didn't cover himself in glory against Stuttgart. And so that means you have Kevin Sturger and Frank Honor. I will obviously die on the hill that Kevin Sturger is still a good player, and he's just being utilised wrong, especially by Seoane. Because the fact that obviously you could use the excuse that, Bochum kind of just give the ball to him and hope he does something with it. But you were playing for a team that was fighting relegation, and he still managed to perform well in difficult games against the likes of Bayern Munich. So there's still a player there. He's just not being utilised properly. And I will die on the hill that it's a Seoane problem. And until Seoane is gone, this is an issue that will not be fixed. And you can see it's a Seoane problem by the fact that Gladbach haven't scored a goal in 4 games. And at times they don't even look like they're going to do it. It's going to continue to snowball. And Tim Kleindienst is going to be back for at least another month or so. So a solution needs to be found quickly. Obviously, the solution could be follow Leverkusen and sack Seoane. But considering how much he's paid, I doubt that will be the option. The other team that won in Saturday afternoon was Leipzig. They won their first game of the season. They beat Heidenheim 2-0. The first half performance wasn't the best. It looked very shaky, and it looked like they were at Heidenheim's level, which wasn't looking good for Ole Werner. However, in the second half, they turned things around. Christoph Baumgartner scored to open the scoring, and then Romelu scored his first goal for Leipzig. It was a great first goal. It was a back heel flick. But Leipzig is slowly improving. They have basically blown up the attack that they had previously. Lois Openda has been sold, Xavi Simons has been sold, Benjamin Sesko has been sold, and now they've just completely replaced them all with Romelu, Jan Diomande, Johan Bakayoko, Antonio Nusa, and now Konrad Harder as well, reportedly. And so it will be interesting to see how this Leipzig team does, because from a potential standpoint, that previous front three was probably the best they've had in a while. And the fact that they weren't able to achieve anything meaningful with it is more of an indictment on Marco Rose, if I'm being completely honest. But it obviously wasn't the best. And so it will be interesting to see where this goes. But obviously, as Leipzig are a product of capitalism, it probably won't go anywhere as long as they're making money. And achievements like winning the league or winning the Pokal are basically irrelevant. So to round out Saturday, it was a Bavarian derby between Augsburg and Bayern. But the takeaways from this is Bayern's attack are great. The defence, however, isn't as much. They were in control for most of the game and were even 3-0 up. However, there were moments in the second half like against Wien Wiesbaden in the Pokal last week, where they fell asleep, and this allowed Augsburg to come back into the game and nearly cause an upset. I think what's abundantly clear is this squad needs depth. There's talk that they may try and sign Nicholas Jackson from Chelsea, but is it enough? You know, you're a Harry Kane injury away from not having a proper striker. Well, you're not even a Harry Kane injury. You're a front four injury away from chaos. You know, scrap everything I just said. It's not even a front four problem. You are a starting 11 injury away from chaos. Because the centre-back partnership of Upamecano and Jonathan Tah hasn't impressed so far. Konrad Laimer's backup is Sasha Bowie, who is not impressed so far either. There's no proper left-back. Stanisic is a right-back playing there. You have Rafael Guerrero, who is not a left-back, but is a left-back, but not good enough at defending to be a left-back, but is playing as an attacking midfielder. In midfield is where they're probably fine, because you have Joshua Kimmich, Leon Goretzka, Alexander Pavlovich, and Tom Bischoff. And Konrad Laimer can even play there as well. But everywhere else, you're one injury away from crisis. And you need depth, and Jackson may help ease the issues in attack, but it's most likely not enough. Whereas for Augsburg, Augsburg from last season would have wilted when they were 3-0 down. But under Sandro Wagner, they rallied and actually made an attempt to come back. And obviously they nearly did. And they actually looked better than Bayern at some points as well. Like, it did take them a while though to grow into the game. Like, in the first half, they were quite strong defensively, but created nothing in terms of attack. It will be interesting to see how this Augsburg team goes as they continue to develop and progress under Sandro Wagner. Then on Sunday, Wolfsburg and Mainz drew 1-1. Wolfsburg again continued to take steps under Paul Simonis. They looked quite good again. Mainz also, they probably do need a striker now. That's something they're trying to address. Obviously, Nelson Viper's an option. I would, if I was Mainz manager, I would just play Viper. But obviously he's still quite raw, and so it would make sense why you may need a more experienced option. Dortmund beat Union 3-0. This was Dortmund's first win of the season in the league. I think it's quite clear to see that Serhou Guirassy is probably one of the best strikers in the world. Most likely even top 5 strikers in the world. He could have scored more than 2 against Union. He missed some very easy chances, but I think it's hard not to make an argument that Guirassy is not a top 5 striker in the world. I mean, you have Haaland, Kane, talking right now. Haaland, Kane, Mbappe, if you count him as a striker. Isak, if you count him. Well, he is a striker, but if you count him. And then Guirassy. And you could even make an argument that Guirassy is better than Isak. And as I said previously, and you can look at all the stuff I've made, that Guirassy, whatever Dortmund achieves this season, Guirassy will be central to it. He is by far their best player, and if they can provide him with the service that suits him, the sky's the limit for Dortmund. What helps is Jan Kuta, for example, is actually showing that he is the type of player that he previously was at Girona. He's slowly finding his feet, which is not a surprise when he's actually playing in his proper position of being a right wing back. Previously, he was a right back, but he couldn't really play there. But now he's getting his opportunity. So it was a win that Dortmund needed, and it will be interesting to see where they go from here now. Finally, to wrap up the match day, it was Cologne versus Freiburg, and Cologne, surprisingly, beat Freiburg 4-1. They're starting to play some nice football under Lukas Kwasniok. And they kind of showed that, you know, they're probably better than people thought they were. And last week's win against Mainz wasn't a fluke. And there's potential, or they're showing now that they're not going to be automatically relegated. And they clearly have a good enough squad. And I think the person to watch out for is Said Elmala. He scored the 4th, and he spent last season on loan at Victoria Cologne in the 3rd division. And he's now starting to play more in the first team. And it's a very nice goal he scored. And I think he's going to be a very interesting player going forward. But for Freiburg, this is their second loss in a row. And I think this is a reality check for them. Obviously, they lost Ritsu Doan, which doesn't help, but I think this could be the potential start of second season syndrome for Julian Schuster, which I'd mentioned in my prediction, not to, blow my own trumpet. But they've shown that things may need to change if they want to, or they've shown that they are currently a work in progress. And although the signings they made in the summer are smart, they're still being integrated. So the table after match day 2, it's obviously Bayern Munich is still top, Eintracht Frankfurt are second, and Cologne are third. And they all have 100% record so far. Granted, it's only been 2 games played. And Dortmund round out the top 4 in fourth with 4 points. And they're level on points with St. Pauli and Wolfsburg. And then at the bottom, it's kind of taken shape already. Apart from Freiburg, who I just mentioned, you have Heidenheim, Werder Bremen, Hamburg, and Borussia Mönchengladbach. And so obviously we are now in an international break where basically it's irrelevant. And the international break, if you're interested in Germany, they're playing Slovakia and Northern Ireland. But after the international break, we do have some interesting games again. We have Bayer Leverkusen versus Eintracht Frankfurt on the Friday, which could be the first challenge that Frankfurt have, depending who the Leverkusen head coach is. Then on the Saturday evening, we have Bayern Munich versus Hamburg. It's historically a very big game, and it will be quite a personal one for Vincent Kompany because he made his name in German football at Hamburg. Dortmund play Heidenheim, Stuttgart play Freiburg, and then on the Sunday you have Borussia Mönchengladbach versus Werder Bremen. Let me know what you think about the second match day. Was Erik ten Hag sacking justified? Should they have kept him longer? Who could be the next manager sacked? Hopefully say Awana.